Before the great sheets of ice slid down from the poles, before the oceans swallowed the plains, the world was different. The earth was not cold, not barren, wide green grasslands stretched all the way to the horizon. Rivers wandered through places that no longer exist on any map, and early humans, if we can even call them that, had already learned to look up at the night sky, searching for meaning in the starlight. They left no writing, no tall stone towers reaching upward, but they did leave traces, faint marks we're only beginning to notice now, as the ice melts and the waters pull back. We like to say that history begins with agriculture, with fire, with the wheel. But what if history truly began before memory itself? What if there was once an age when people lived in such balance with the world that they didn't need to carve their names into stone, when everything they knew slipped away with the rising seas, leaving behind only myths, stories of gods from the ocean, of a great flood, of a world reborn? Maybe the frightening part isn't that we don't know who they were, but that we may be walking on their footprints without realizing it, because the soil beneath us, the stones we cut, even the old maps we dismiss as mistakes, all of it could be fragments of a memory long drowned, a memory not found in textbooks, not sitting in surface soil, not preserved in museums. It rests under ice, under water, inside a silence that has lasted more than 12,000 years. And tonight, on Bedtime History, we'll gently close our eyes and drift backward through those layers of time, as if touching the last breath of a world now lost, from ancient maps dismissed as myth, to forgotten expeditions, to the clues of Atlantis, sunken cities, and scientific reports once locked away. Every layer we lift will reveal more than geology. It will open a doorway to a truth one humanity may not yet be ready to face. We dig into the earth to find the past, peeling back each layer of sediment, each stone fragment, each faint carving, treating them as silent witnesses of history. But the deeper we go, the more we begin to sense something uncomfortable. Entire layers of soil that are empty, voids stretching across millennia, as if the opening chapters of humanity's story were quietly erased by someone or something. Science tells us that human history truly begins around 12,000 years ago, after the last ice age. But discoveries keep whispering that the picture might be wider, finely crafted tools appearing far too early, carvings that show astronomical knowledge beyond what hunter-gatherers should have understood, and ancient maps describing prehistoric shorelines with uncanny accuracy. They don't form a complete story, not yet, but every clue asks the same question. What if the past is longer, deeper, and far more complex than we've been taught? The problem isn't the lack of evidence, it's how we treat it. Many artifacts are pushed aside simply because they don't fit the familiar model of human progress. Sunken structures are dismissed as natural formations, ancient geometric symbols are written off as the play of time, and legends of beings from the sea are shelved as collective imagination. Instead of widening the question, we tighten the answer. But memory doesn't disappear. It only changes its home. From the land it slides into the sea. From artifacts it shifts into myth. From archaeology it hides quietly inside DNA. Some things lie too deep to dig up, and some sit so close we no longer notice them. Maybe the past isn't beneath our feet, but in the empty space between knowledge and belief. The place where we're forced to ask, where we truly began. Because sometimes, to see the past, we don't need to dig deeper. We just need to look in a different direction. And in that small moment when the angle shifts, the doorway to a pre-Ice Age Earth begins to open. If we could look at the Earth 20,000 years ago, we would see a planet nothing like the one we know today. There were no massive polar ice caps, no endless deserts. Sea levels were hundreds of meters lower, revealing sweeping grasslands where oceans now lie. In Europe, Doggerland connected Britain to the continent, and in Southeast Asia, Sunderland stretched from the mainland all the way to Borneo, a lost continent now surviving only as a geological memory. The climate was warm and remarkably stable. Dense forests covered the continents, and rivers wove themselves into vast, intricate networks. Places that are now the Sahara or Central Asia were once great lakes and fertile grasslands. In such conditions, humans, or perhaps an earlier form of intelligence, lived, developed, adapted, and may have built a way of life far more complex than we often imagine. They built shelters, painted on rock walls, watched the sky, and maintained rituals even without leaving behind a written language. These land bridges created a connected world. People could walk from Asia into the Americas across Beringia, from the Middle East into North Africa without meeting a desert, from what is now Vietnam all the way to Java without needing a boat. Ideas, customs, and knowledge may have traveled faster than we assume. A natural network, linking prehistoric groups through land and through memory. Then the climate shifted. Ice poured down from the north, forests retreated, rivers thinned, sea levels rose, swallowing the lands that had once been centers of ancient life. The surviving groups watched the shoreline creep forward year by year, generation by generation, and they told stories of a time when the land stretched far into the sea. Seeds of myths about sinking continents, drowned cities, and gods who came from the water carrying knowledge. Those stories may not be mere legends. They could be the final memories of a world erased by ice. And to understand what hides beneath that fading memory, we must look toward one particular region, a place that once thrived in the pre-Ice Age world, only to vanish beneath cold water. Doggerland, the lost continent buried beneath the North Sea. Between Britain and Denmark, beneath the cold waters of the North Sea, lie the remnants of a land that once connected Europe. Today, the bones of mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, and even early humans still catch in the nets of fishermen. Quiet proof that this was once a vast, living world, not an ocean floor. Doggerland once stretched from the coast of the Netherlands to eastern England, a landscape of birch forests, open grasslands, and winding freshwater rivers. Great animals moved with the seasons, and humans built camps on the higher ridges, hunting, gathering, and living by the natural rhythm of the steppe. Back then, the sun didn't rise from the sea. It rose over an endless horizon of land. But when the Ice Age withdrew, the ice sheets of northern Europe melted, and the sea began to rise in waves. Valleys turned into bays, grasslands into cold, shadowed marsh. By around 8,000 years ago, Doggerland had almost entirely vanished. A massive tsunami from the Storegga Slide is believed to have delivered the final blow, sweeping the last of this world into the deep. What makes Doggerland important is not only its disappearance, but the scale of life that once existed there. Through sonar and seafloor surveys, Researchers have mapped ancient rivers, lakes, and elevated areas where people once lived. And from this, they've realized something striking. Many prehistoric population centers around the world now lie underwater. Lost long before writing ever appeared, Doggerland left no cities, no temples. Only sediment, fossilized bones, and questions about the communities that lived for thousands of years, then faded away. History often looks to the places humans built, but sometimes the lands humans lost reveals something deeper, that our journey doesn't rise only from mountains, but from the wide plains now sleeping beneath the sea. And if Doggerland is Europe's erased memory, then to the south lies an even greater world that suffered the same fate, Sunderland, the ancient continent of Southeast Asia. Today, Southeast Asia is a region of thousands of islands, but when the sea level was nearly 100 meters lower, all of it was a single continuous continent, stretching from Vietnam, Thailand, and Cambodia across the Malay Peninsula into Sumatra, Java, Borneo, and even farther. This vast land mass, nearly 2 million square kilometers in size, was Sundaland, what we now call the Java Sea, the South China Sea, or the Strait of Malacca, was once a humid, river-rich plain fed by ancient river systems far larger than the Mekong of today. A warm, stable tropical climate made Sunderland an ideal environment for human life, hunting, early cultivation, long-term settlements, and constant interaction among different groups. Many cultural motifs across the region, spiral symbols, the serpent spirit Naga, the Garuda bird, and rituals centered on water and floods, share striking similarities. They hint that the communities now separated by sea may once have belonged to a single symbolic world rooted in the time when all lived together on the Sunderland continent. As the oceans rose, the people of Sunderland were forced to migrate. Some theories suggest they carried with them early agricultural techniques, astronomical knowledge, and entire belief systems, spreading northward into mainland Asia. Traces of these ancient populations may still be hidden in the DNA of hundreds of millions of people today. Modern LiDAR scans and seafloor mapping have detected unusual structures beneath the sediment around the Strait of Malacca and the Java Sea, terraces, straight lines, and stone blocks with shapes that do not appear natural. They're not clear enough to draw conclusions, but clear enough to raise questions about whether significant settlements once stood there before they were drowned. Rising seas don't just destroy land, they fracture memory. Many Southeast Asian origin myths begin with a great flood and end with the creation of a new order. These stories may be the final reflections of a time when people were forced to leave their vast homeland as it sank. If Doggerland is Europe's drowned memory, then Sunderland is the memory of all Southeast Asia, a legacy shattered into 1,000 pieces by the ocean, yet still alive in myth, symbols, and the quiet spread of culture. And as many of its people journeyed northward, they reached a completely different world, Beringia, the frozen gateway that opened the path to a global migration. Between Siberia and Alaska, where today there is only cold water and drifting ice, there once stretched a vast land known as Beringia. When sea levels dropped during the Ice Age, the sea floor rose as open plain, linking the two continents. This wasn't just a migration route, it was a complete world, a place of grasslands, lakes, and great herds moving beneath the northern sky. For a long time, Beringia was imagined as a one-way corridor for ancient people crossing into the Americas. But modern research, from ancient DNA to pollen samples to traces of old fire pits, reveals something very different. Humans stayed here for a long time. They built shelters, hunted reindeer, kept rituals, and buried their dead. Beringia wasn't a temporary stop. It was a homeland that endured for millennia. Along with their presence came stories, symbols, and beliefs. Many motifs found in Inuit, Chukchi, and indigenous American cultures still carry striking parallels. Spirals, white birds, pathways connecting two worlds. These images aren't coincidences, but echoes of a shared memory, shaped in a place where people once stood between two continents. Beringia was a crossroads of the world, where Asia and the Americas blended not just in geography, but in spirit. Here, ideas about nature, the cycle of life and death, and the sky above may have been repeated through countless generations before spreading into new lands. As the climate warmed, the ice melted, and the oceans rose, Beringia disappeared beneath the sea. The communities who lived there scattered. Some returned to Siberia, others moved deep into the Americas. The separation happened in space, but in genetics and symbolism, the threads of connection remain. Beneath the cold waters of today's Bering Strait lies the ground where humans once walked freely between continents with no borders at all, yet one puzzle remains ahead. How did these ancient groups, and even civilizations far beyond them, possess knowledge of coastlines and continents no human eyes had yet seen? The answer lies in the ancient maps that do not match the age they should belong to. In 1513, at a time when Europe had no idea what Antarctica looked like, an Ottoman admiral named Piri-Reis created a map that showed the northern coastline of the continent as if someone had seen it with their own eyes. The controversy comes from this. The outline matches with astonishing accuracy the coastline of Antarctica without ice, something only 20th century radar could confirm. Piri-Reis insisted he merely copied from much older maps. If that's true, it means there were source materials from a far earlier age, maps drawn when sea levels and climate were nothing like today, and he wasn't the only one. From the 16th to the 18th century, maps by Orance Finet and Philippe Boiche also depicted Antarctica as a land of mountains, bays, and valleys, details absolutely unknowable to anyone of their time. These maps don't look like imagination because their coastlines and geographic curves match modern geological data. The repetition of accuracy makes the idea of artists filling in the blanks hard to accept. If older originals existed, they must have been created when Antarctica was not yet fully covered in ice, meaning tens of thousands of years ago. That brings us back to a vision of Earth before the Ice Age, when sea levels were low and the continents had completely different shapes. Perhaps the people who drew those earliest maps weren't ordinary sailors, but keepers of knowledge. Communities capable of tracking the stars, measuring coastlines, and recording the shape of the world in an age long forgotten. Over generations of copying, the originals vanished, leaving only distorted descendants in the libraries of Istanbul, Paris, or Genoa. Today, as LiDAR scans cut through the jungles of the Amazon, Cambodia, and Yucatan, they reveal squares, circles, and long axes aligned to the sky, like the surviving strokes of ancient maps, but written onto the earth through architecture. Modern technology is uncovering things someone may have noted tens of thousands of years ago. These out-of-time maps remind us that knowledge of the Earth was once far richer than we imagine. There may have been civilizations that understood coastlines, ocean currents, and the heavens, only to be buried by rising seas, ice, and time. And now, through the thin beams of LiDAR in the sky, that memory is opening again, bit by bit, surface by surface, as if the world is finally letting us read what was written before history began. When humans began looking at the Earth from above, instead of only walking on its surface, the past revealed itself in ways thousands of years of traditional archaeology never could. LiDAR, razor-thin beams of light, slips through leaves, mist, and soil, redrawing the hidden shapes beneath. And in the last 2 decades, this technology has completely transformed our understanding of forests we once believed untouched by human hands. In Cambodia, LiDAR uncovered an entire ancient urban network surrounding Angkor. Roads, canals, reservoirs, and ceremonial axes laid out with astonishing precision. In Guatemala, tens of thousands of Maya structures, once swallowed by the Petén jungle, emerged as a vast city that grew across generations. But the greatest surprise came from the Amazon. What was once thought of as untouched wilderness revealed circles, squares, and long, ruler-straight avenues stretching for tens of kilometers, large enough to prove the presence of complex societies. What stuns us isn't only that these structures exist, but that they appear everywhere. From Southeast Asia to South America, the jungles hide planned settlements, astronomical alignments, hydraulic systems, things no small or isolated group could have created. In many places, newly discovered structures sit atop foundations even older. This suggests that the Maya, the Khmer, or the Amazonian peoples weren't always the first to build there. They were continuing something earlier, as if recognizing that these places held meaning from a time far deeper than their own. LiDAR isn't just opening forests, it's opening buried memory. The jungle is no longer a wild zone, but Earth's archive, where time covers human traces beneath a thick blanket of leaves. Every returning laser pulse is a fragment of memory rising out of silence. But technology only gives us shapes, not who built them, not when, not why. And when the same geometric forms appear in South America, Southeast Asia, India, and Africa, a question becomes impossible to ignore. Is this truly just cultural coincidence? Circles, triangles, straight solar alignments, repeating across continents, hint that we're touching a language older than any individual civilization, a language from a deeper layer of memory, where symbols existed long before history began. Across Scotland, the Sahara, Peru, and Indonesia, one shape keeps returning: the spiral. It's carved into stone, painted in caves, repeated on pottery, appearing from Newgrange in Ireland all the way to the Jomon culture of Japan. There was no contact between these continents, yet the symbol is almost identical everywhere, unsettlingly so. The spiral is often interpreted as life, death, rebirth, but it may also be a visual memory: swirling water, spinning wind, the movement of the sky, or the natural rhythms of the world before the Ice Age. It could be the way our ancestors captured the motion of the earth before language existed. The triangle, from Egyptian pyramids to Maya temples to megalithic stone shapes in Europe, is always tied to ideas of power, transformation, or the meeting point between heaven and earth. Interpretations differ, but most cultures see the triangle as the shape of cosmic order. The eye, From the Eye of Horus to the Nazar amulet to symbols carved on temple roofs, represents knowledge, the ability to see the unseen. It isn't just religion, it is the symbol of awareness itself, the human capacity to observe nature and understand its patterns. Carl Jung called these forms archetypes of the collective unconscious, but if we look through the lens of geology and climate, a deeper possibility appears. These symbols may not just be unconscious, they may be fragments of a shared memory passed down through countless generations from a time when humans endured the same natural catastrophes. Rising seas, advancing ice, disappearing continents, when cities sink, forests grow back, and myths shift, shapes remain, because shapes are easiest to carve, easiest to remember, and they survive time better than stories do. Maybe the spiral is a memory of the ocean's motion, the triangle, the high ground people fled to when waters rose, the eye, the sky they prayed to as their world changed. Meanings evolve, but geometry does not. And when these shapes appear in caves so deep that sunlight has never touched their walls, we're faced with the feeling that we're looking at something older than history itself. A form of memory carried by humans long before writing was born. Next we'll step into those very caves, where the oldest traces of human remembrance are carved into the dark. When we step into caves like Lascaux, Altamira, or Chauvet, we don't find traces of primitive minds. We find a fully formed intelligence. The paintings there, dated to 30,000, even 40,000 years ago, are not the random marks of people merely trying to survive. They are the work of minds that observed, shaped, and told stories through light and shadow. These ancient artists used charcoal, minerals, red ochre, and handmade binders to create colors that survived tens of thousands of years. They used the natural curves of the cave walls to create movement, layering strokes to produce depth. Techniques. European art wouldn't rediscover until millennia later, and they never painted near the entrance. The images always appeared deep inside, far beyond the reach of natural light, accessible only by crawling through narrow passages that tells us their purpose went far beyond decoration. These were ritual spaces, places where humans sought contact with the sacred, or with memories too large for spoken language. Prehistoric artists may have been shamans, people entering altered states of consciousness to meet the spirits of nature, then recording their visions. The human-animal hybrids, the handprints pressed against stone, are not simply art. They are fingerprints of a connection between humanity and the universe. One detail that has caught researchers' attention is this. Among the thousands of animals there are dots, clusters, and repeating patterns. When compared to the night sky of that era, many of them match constellations and astronomical events, meaning prehistoric people weren't just painting the world around them, they were recording the sky above. This leads to a bold but increasingly discussed idea. Perhaps these caves weren't just storytelling spaces. Perhaps they are records of an event, a moment when the people believed the heavens had changed. The fleeing animals at Chauvet, the long sequences of dots at Lascaux, when examined closely, resemble the form of a comet. Maybe they witnessed something fall from the sky, a light so powerful, a disruption so immense that they felt compelled to carve it into stone. The only way a memory could survive when the world itself was shifting. And not long after these paintings appeared, Earth's climate entered a violent turning point. Ice melted. temperatures plunged again. Winters stretched longer than anything humanity had known. What happened in the sky? The answer lies in the light of the final winter. Around 12,800 years ago, as the Earth was warming at the end of the Ice Age, the planet suddenly plunged into a deep freeze that lasted more than 1,000 years. The Younger Dryas temperatures dropped abruptly, melting ice stopped in its tracks, megafauna vanished, and forests burned on a global scale. The cause remains a mystery, but many researchers, based on layers of soot, melted glass spherules and nanodiamonds, argue that the Earth was struck by one or several fragments of a comet. A massive airburst or an impact onto the ice sheet could have cut off heat, thrown dust into the atmosphere, and pushed the world into a final winter. If that's true, prehistoric humans witnessed it, and they recorded it the only way they could, with images. At Göbekli Tepe, the carved pillar, known as the Vulture Stone, shows a set of astronomical symbols. When aligned with the sky of 10,950 before Common Era, the carvings match the positions of stars and the trajectory of a long-tailed celestial object. Some researchers believe this stone is a memorial to the cometary explosion that triggered the Younger Dryas. Similarly, across Spain, Arizona, Scandinavia, and Australia, engravings of bright-tailed objects falling from the sky appear. Cultures with no contact, yet symbols that are strikingly alike. In world mythologies, the same event echoes under different names: the burning chariot of Phaethon, the fire of Sekhmet, Agni's destruction of humankind, the heavenly dragon meteor of China, the fire serpent of the Maya. Languages change, but the core remains, a light falling from the sky. Ancient people didn't understand astronomy the way we do, but they understood that something immense had happened, and they reacted in the only way available to them. They carved it into stone. A warning, a memory of the cosmos. After that event, sea levels rose, lands like Doggerland and Sunderland disappeared, and humans were forced to migrate. From those ruins, they began to rebuild. But for the first time in history, they built symbolically, turning their architecture toward the sky as if trying to understand the catastrophe that reshaped their world. One of those places was Göbekli Tepe, a site so ancient it forces us to ask, did architecture really begin after agriculture? Or was it the response of survivors of the final winter, trying to preserve memory before it vanished? And it is there, on that hill of carved stone, that the story enters an entirely new age, where pillars rise, where the sky is carved into architecture, and where human memory steps out of the darkness of caves into the first light of civilization. Among the stony hills of southern Turkey, Göbekli Tepe rises like a paradox carved into history. Its T-shaped pillars, some soaring 5 meters high and weighing tens of tons, stand in concentric circles. On their surfaces are precise carvings: foxes, snakes, aurochs, birds, and astronomical symbols that people of that era, according to the usual theories, should not have been able to understand. With an age of more than 11,600 years, Göbekli Tepe predates agriculture, metal, even pottery. And that breaks the familiar sequence: settlement, farming, architecture, religion. Here the order is reversed completely. This place shows something radical. Humans didn't build temples because they had settled. They settled because they needed a temple. Layer after layer, archaeologists uncover hundreds of pillars arranged with clear intention. At the heart of each circle, stand two taller pillars, a duality symbolizing union, heaven and earth, life and death, human and divine. Some pillars have human hands carved in relief, not vague traces, but firm statements of presence, as if saying, "We built this." The animal symbols aren't random either. They correspond to constellations and celestial positions at the end of the Ice Age, proof that the builders observed the sky with astonishing precision. This was unmistakably a ceremonial center, a place where groups from across the Near East converged long before they learned to farm. And then comes the greatest mystery. Why did the very people who built it bury it? The entire complex was deliberately filled with earth and stone, clearly intentional. As if they wanted to seal away an age, to store the memory of an older world before stepping into a new one, as if someone tucked away a book too important to lose, waiting for future eyes to discover it by accident. Göbekli Tepe is not just a temple, it is a witness to a turning point. It marks the moment humanity stepped out of the darkness of caves, left art on walls behind, and began to build with order, with celestial alignments, geometry, and symbols. And if it stood here 11,600 years ago, then it cannot be the beginning. It must be the last surviving piece of a wider network of sacred centers once spread across the land. And indeed, when we look outward, other places begin to speak. Fragments of an ancient way of thinking, older than we ever imagined. After Göbekli Tepe, new discoveries make it clear that this site was not an exception. Across 3 continents, ancient places are beginning to rise out of silence, and all of them challenge history. Karahan Tepe, not far from Göbekli Tepe, reveals structures even more intricate. Dense clusters of T-shaped pillars, ceremonial corridors, ritual shafts, and full-body human sculptures carved with such detail you can see the eyes, the nose, even the expression. Many sections of Karahan Tepe are estimated to be about 500 years older than Göbekli Tepe, suggesting this architectural tradition didn't appear out of nowhere. It had already been developing. Leaving the Near East and moving towards Southeast Asia, we encounter Gunung Padang in West Java, long believed to be a natural hill. But seismic surveys and ground-penetrating radar show that beneath 30 meters of soil lie layers of man-made structures stacked in ordered blocks with a central void chamber and signs of astronomical alignment. Some of the deepest layers date to around 20,000 years ago. If confirmed, Gunung Padang belongs to a time before the last ice age, completely overturning the usual timeline of civilization. In South America, Monteverde in Chile proves that humans were in the Americas far earlier than the Beringia migration model suggests. Its preserved traces are more than 14,000 years old, and deeper layers hint at dates reaching 30,000 years, meaning people lived in the Americas long before the Bering Land Bridge ever emerged from the ice. 3 places, Karahan Tepe, Gunung Padang, Monteverde, separated by half the world, yet sharing one truth. They are older than history allows. They show symbolic thinking, organizational skill, and a level of complexity that does not fit the textbook image of primitive humans. The issue isn't the lack of evidence, it's that the evidence doesn't fit the linear model we're used to, simple, complex. These sites suggest there may have been architectural traditions, ceremonial centers, even systems of knowledge formed before agriculture, then erased when seas rose and climates shifted. They are not just points on an archaeological map. They are fractures in human memory, places where another layer of our past peeks through for a moment until the soil is peeled away too deeply for denial to cover it again. And when we look at ancient world maps and see how many regions were once broad plains now lying beneath tens of meters of water, one unavoidable question appears. If forgotten structures like these exist on land, then in the deep ocean, how many cities have we never known at all? That is where the story leaves the continents and moves into the sea, where ruins have been kept in darkness for tens of thousands of years. In places where sunlight can no longer reach, the ocean floor reveals structures that modern eyes struggle to label as natural. Wide flat platforms like plazas, neatly carved terraces, right angles aligned with uncanny precision, as if a human hand once shaped them. No writing, no statues, only stone, water, and silence. And yet that silence raises an even larger question. Are these geological illusions, or the foundations of cities forgotten when the seas rose? In 2001, off the coast of Cuba, archaeologists working with the Canadian Navy detected structures nearly 700 meters deep. Sonar captured massive stone blocks arranged in square and rectangular patterns, some as tall as small buildings. Long straight lines, stretching for hundreds of meters, cut across the seabed, making the place resemble submerged ruins more than natural formations. If these structures once stood on dry land before sinking, they would date to more than 12,000 years ago, when sea levels rose over 100 meters after the last ice age. Across the Pacific, off Yonaguni in Japan, divers found a stepped stone structure so large it resembles an underwater pyramid. The rock faces are flat as though planed smooth. Corridors and sharp right angles run along the terraces. Some geologists argue it's the result of unusual weathering, but the clean cuts and stacked layers feel more like deliberate shaping than coincidence. In India, off the coast of Gujarat, underwater surveys have revealed rows of pillars, rectangular foundations, even fragments of pottery buried in sediment. Some carbon samples date to more than 9,000 years ago. If these are truly remains of a city, then humanity's first civilizations did not begin only in Mesopotamia, but also in a world now drowned beneath the Indian Ocean. And here is the strange common thread. All of these structures lie at depths that match the exact rise of sea levels after the last ice age. Not only Cuba, Japan, and India, but the Bahamas, Egypt off Alexandria, Indonesia, all show similar shapes. When so many locations line up precisely with ancient shorelines, calling everything coincidence becomes harder every year. Could it be that when the world thawed, vast coastal plains, the places humans most love to settle, were swallowed whole, leaving behind submerged memories of the people who lived there? Could this be the root of ancient legends about lost continents, Atlantis, Mu, Lemuria? Yet instead of calling them cities, archaeology uses a safer phrase, unusual structures, because to admit even one of them is man-made would force history to reorder its entire timeline. Beneath the oceans of today may lie more than stone, perhaps pages of memory from an age before water claimed the land. And humans, unable to preserve those memories in physical form, passed them on the only way they could, through myth. If we gather all the world's ancient stories and place them side by side, a pattern repeats with almost suspicious consistency: a great flood, a vanished world, a handful of survivors, and a new beginning. From Mesopotamia to the Himalayas, From Greece to Polynesia, from China to the Amazon, every culture remembers a world-ending deluge. In Sumer, Utnapishtim survives after the god Enki whispers a warning. In India, Manu is saved from rising seas by Matsya. In Greece, Deucalion and Pyrrha recreate humanity from stones. In China, Yu the Great spends years taming the waters to restore balance. In the Americas, the Maya speak of the sea swallowing the sun, while the Inca tell of viriculture, creating a new humanity after the waters retreat cultures that never encountered one another, telling the same story. That is rarely coincidence. Climate studies show that after the Younger Dryas, global ice melt triggered massive sea level rise, drowning Doggerland, Sunderland, and vast coastal regions of the Indian and Atlantic Oceans. Around the same time, catastrophic events like the Black Sea flood, the Ryan-Pittman hypothesis, may have consumed hundreds of thousands of square kilometers in a single season. If these upheavals happen within just a few generations, the memory would become a universal foundation of world mythology. Symbolic analysis reveals water equals destruction, but also rebirth with the boat. Memory carried safely through chaos. Speed the mountain, the last refuge when the lowlands vanish, when the gods, survivors, or leaders later mythologized, meaning flood myths are not merely moral tales, they are coded histories. Memories passed across millennia, wherever the waters once swept through. When the old world drowned, the survivors told what they saw, in the only form their era could preserve: symbols. And with time, symbols became myth. Myth became religion. Perhaps the very people who lived through that first great flood built centers like Göbekli Tepe to mark the rebirth of humankind. Temples, pyramids, stone pillars, not only places of worship but physical memory banks, carved to preserve the order of the old world so the new one would not forget its origin. And within every flood legend, a warning remains. The world can change in a single moment, and when religion emerged, perhaps it was not just belief, but humanity's way of preserving its own memory after the sea had taken everything else. Next, the story moves deeper. Religion as an ancient technology of memory, and why humans built sacred mountains, pyramids, and celestial alignments to ensure they would never forget the world that came before them. If floods were nature's way of wiping memory clean, then religion was humanity's way of writing that memory back so it would not vanish with the rising water. Because when we follow the trail of ancient flood legends and the temples built in the centuries after the great thaw, we see something clearly. Early belief was never just faith in gods, but a system for storing knowledge, encoded through symbols, rituals, and architecture. Imagine the survivors standing in a world reshaped beyond recognition. Plains gone, forests drowned, the sky heavy with dust, the ground unfamiliar beneath their feet. They had no paper, no writing, no technology. The only thing they could pass on to the next generation was a story. And so knowledge became myth, lived experience became ritual, astronomy became temples. In the first civilizations, religion was a living archive, a way to ensure that the most important truth of all, the laws of nature, would not be forgotten. The Egyptians told of Osiris dying and returning, but hidden within that tale was the cycle of the Nile flood. The Hindus spoke of the incarnations of Vishnu, each avatar mirroring a new age after a natural upheaval. The Inca worshipped the sun not from superstition, but because its position meant survival in the Andes. The Greeks told the story of Demeter and Persephone to mark the seasons of planting and drought. Religion became an astronomical calendar told through symbols, guiding the generations that followed. When the waters rise, when the crops return, when the sky shifts, the earliest temples, Göbekli Tepe, Nabta Playa, Giza, Teotihuacan, all share one defining truth. They were not built only for worship, but to keep time. The direction of each entrance, the alignment of each corridor, the placement of each pillar, all match crucial celestial events, solstices, equinoxes, lunar cycles, star paths. That was not superstition, that was survival engineering. The gods who came from the sea in Sumerian, Egyptian, Maya, and Polynesian traditions may have been another form of memory. Stories about the people who carried the old knowledge into new lands, Wans, Thoth, Quetzalcoatl. They all appear after the flood, and they all bring wisdom. They were not necessarily divine, but they were the ones who remembered, passing their knowledge on in a language the new world could understand, the language of sacred symbols. Through this lens, ancient religion becomes memory encoded. Each myth is a data fragment, each symbol a line of code, each ritual an algorithm repeated across generations to prevent knowledge from fading away. And so ancient people always placed the sacred on high ground, mountain peaks, pyramids, stone towers, observatories, the instinct of those who had once watched the waters rise. Keep the knowledge where the water cannot reach. At the heart of every ancient tradition stands a single image, a tower that links earth and sky, a bridge between memory and the cosmos. And that is where the Tower of Babel emerges, why, not as a moral tale, but as a symbol of memory breaking apart after the first great catastrophe. In the Bible, the story of the Tower of Babel is brief. But when we view it through the lens of collective memory, it becomes the most powerful metaphor for a single moment. The moment humanity lost its ability to understand one another, and with it, the loss of a shared knowledge. The story says this: after the great flood, all humans spoke one language. They worked together to build a tower reaching the heavens, so they would never be separated again. But God confused their speech. They could no longer understand each other, and they scattered across the earth. Through religion, it reads as a lesson in humility. Through history, it reads as a story of civilizational fragmentation. Perhaps that tower was never a literal structure, but a metaphor for the attempt to rebuild a shared memory after a global catastrophe. And confused language may not refer only to spoken words, but to the language of symbols, the language of the sky, the language through which humans once read the world. Before the separation, humanity may have shared one symbolic system: the sun, the moon, the spiral, the triangle, the bird, the serpent. But when the surviving groups spread across the earth, that knowledge shattered into fragments. Each group kept a piece. Some kept the sky, some kept the rituals, some kept the architecture. The Tower of Babel, then, becomes a metaphor for the disintegration of knowledge. Modern science strangely supports this. Linguists believe all languages can be traced back to a proto-human language, a single ancestral tongue. Jung spoke of archetypes, primal symbols that appear in every culture. Perhaps these were the words of the Babel language, the language of primal memory. When that language broke apart, humanity lost the ability to perceive the world through one shared frame. Each region rewrote the universe in its own way: new religions, new myths, new calendars, all fragments of a story that was once unified. Even today we live with the legacy of that fragmentation. Thousands of languages, hundreds of religions, countless versions of how the world began. Every culture seems to be trying to rebuild the tower in its own form. The Egyptian pyramid, the Sumerian ziggurat, the Indian stupa, the Tibetan mandala. And through all of these monuments, one question echoes. Why is the memory of humanity so fractured? Is it natural? Or is it the result of limits humans placed on knowledge itself? Because some things do not disappear with time. They disappear because they were not allowed to survive. And that question opens the next part. Why is the past silent? Who decides what becomes history, and what must remain buried under earth, under water, or inside myth? Modern science helps us explain the universe through tools, formulas, and models. Yet those very models, when they grow too solid, can turn into walls. When a new discovery does not fit the approved story, the first reaction is often not curiosity, but suspicion. A date that is too early, a structure unlike anything in known cultures, a tool found in the wrong geological layer, all of it can lead scholars to scrutinize the messenger before scrutinizing the artifact. Not because the evidence is weak, but because the framework of knowledge has no room for it. For 2 centuries, academia has depended on a tidy linear sequence: hunting, agriculture, cities, metal, civilization. If a civilization existed 10,000 years before agriculture, that sequence collapses, and with it countless textbooks, theories, and research paths. So a young archaeologist who wants to publish, advance, and secure funding must stay on the rails. Any discovery that is too early, too large, or too unusual becomes a career risk. There is no conspiracy, no secret society, only the inertia of thought. Peer review, created to protect science, sometimes becomes a fence that preserves frozen viewpoints. An anomalous finding is often dismissed with the phrase, "there is no compatible theoretical framework," even though every theory is only compatible with what it allows itself to see. Like archaeology digging only where it has permission, the fear is not that there is nothing beneath the soil, but that if we dig too deep, we may uncover something we are not prepared to see. Those who dare step outside the template, from the divers at Yonaguni to the survey teams at Gunung Padang to the seafloor researchers off Cuba, are placed in a drawer labeled fringe, a drawer almost no one wants to reopen. And so silence becomes a blanket over human memory, soft, safe, but dangerous, because it makes science forget its most important duty, to doubt itself. Some evidence is too strange to reject, yet too inconvenient to accept, and so it is given a name as light as smoke, anomalies. But sometimes those anomalies are the truest part of the story, and now we step toward them, the traces that leave history unsure of itself. Small objects sometimes carry enough weight to shake all of history. A blade, a hammer, a single cut on stone. If any of them appear in the wrong geological layer, the entire story of humanity would have to be rewritten. And for more than a century, discoveries like these have surfaced and then disappeared, as if they were too dangerous to look at directly. Around 1885 in Austria, at the Lochau coal mine, workers found a 12-million-year-old slate block enclosing a metal object with a hole in its center, shaped like a flywheel or an industrial hammer. The Linz Museum confirmed it was not natural. Then the artifact vanished, leaving behind only a single blurred black and white photo. In 1938 in South Africa, inside rock dated to 2.8 billion years, miners discovered perfectly symmetrical metallic spheres with grooves running around them, crafted with a precision even modern lathes struggle to achieve. They should not exist, yet they are there. In 19th century America, in the coal mines of Illinois and Oklahoma, miners reported objects trapped in fossilized strata, a shoe print, a patterned metal vessel, nails and blades, all embedded in rock hundreds of millions of years old. They were brushed aside because they did not fit human evolution, but rock layers do not lie. Only our explanations make them inconvenient. Perhaps they were not traces of modern humans at all, but of another form of intelligence, one that lived before us, then vanished after a global catastrophe. Or perhaps history is not linear, but cyclical, civilizations rising, reaching a peak, disappearing, and tens of thousands of years later beginning the next round. What is troubling is not that these objects exist, but the fear surrounding them. No one wants the 12-million-year-old hammer to be real. No one wants the 2.8 billion-year-old spheres to be artificial. No one wants a prehistoric bone to show cuts made by a crafted blade, because if they are true, then everything else is wrong. And so they are given new labels: geological phenomena, natural formations, errors in documentation, anomalies, and memory is buried under one more layer. But if these tools are real, if other hands existed before ours, then who were they? Where did they live? What did they build? And why did all of it vanish? Perhaps the answer is not hidden in these small objects, but in the enormous structures scattered across continents, where stone is heat-bent like wax, where blocks weighing hundreds of tons are stacked with a precision that modern engineering still bows to. And that will be the next chapter, the world of architectures never meant for primitive hands. There are structures that force us to pause and accept that the people who lived thousands of years ago were not as simple as history likes to describe. Places like Baalbek, Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo, and Tiwanaku are not just archaeological sites. They are stone records of a technical mastery far beyond what we imagine prehistoric humans could have done. Baalbek, in Lebanon, is the clearest example. On that dry hillside lie 3 colossal stones, the trilithon, each weighing nearly 800 tons, placed together with millimeter precision. Beneath them are even larger blocks, some over 1,200 tons, left behind in their quarry like the abandoned remnants of an unfinished project. No ancient text describes the Romans moving them, because they could not. That foundation existed before them as the base of a structure shaped by another hand. On the other side of the earth, Sacsayhuaman in Peru makes modern engineers step back in awe. Blocks weighing more than 300 tons, cut into strange flowing curves, are fitted together so tightly that not even a sheet of paper can slip through the seams. No mortar, no steel. Yet the walls have survived earthquakes for thousands of years. The Inca said it plainly: "We did not build this, they only continued it." Ollantaytambo tells a different story. Massive red stones hauled from quarries tens of kilometers away, dragged across deep valleys, no wheels, no draft animals. Yet someone moved each block up a mountain slope more than 2,700 meters high. At Tiwanaku, near Lake Titicaca, we find andesite blocks hard as steel, cut with the precision of CNC machining, parallel grooves, perfect right angles, surfaces smooth as glass. The sun gate, Puerta del Sol, carries an astronomical calendar encoded in imagery, so accurate that modern astronomers are still stunned. The strangest part is this. Many of these sites sit along the same band of latitude, aligned with the movements of the sun and stars as though ancient builders possessed a global map, at a time when history insists they had no metal, no writing, no science. When explanations run out, archaeology calls them mysteries. But perhaps they are not mysterious at all, only too ancient to fit the story we are comfortable believing. These walls show mechanical precision, knowledge of gravity, and signs of cutting techniques that remain difficult to replicate even today. Some theories suggest ancient people may have understood resonance, frequency, or methods of reducing stone weight, ideas that sound strange, yet appear faintly in myths about sound-lifting stone. Even without proof, the structures themselves still stand, reminding us that what we cannot explain does not mean it never existed. And if these monuments come from far earlier than history allows, perhaps the problem lies not in the stones, but in the clock we use to measure time. When an artifact is unearthed, its true value doesn't lie in its shape, but in its age. Yet age, something that sounds objective, is in reality built on assumptions, environments, and interpretation. Carbon-14, the most common dating method, can only measure up to 50,000 years, and only works accurately if the carbon levels in the atmosphere remain stable, but Earth has never been stable. Volcanoes, solar storms, magnetic shifts, even celestial impacts constantly altered carbon concentrations. The margin of error can stretch across thousands of years, yet the results still enter textbooks as if they were absolute truth. To stabilize the timeline, researchers use calibration curves, matching new samples to older samples already accepted. Meaning a new date must agree with the old date, and anything outside that frame is dismissed as contaminated, anomalous, or unreasonable, as if time itself must obey a story already written. When organic samples at Göbekli Tepe returned, dates around 13,000 years, they were adjusted down to 11,600 to fit evolutionary expectations. When deep layers at Gunung Padang produced dates over 20,000 years, they were labeled errors because there could not have been structures at that time. But what if the original assumptions are what's wrong? What if the ancient atmosphere was entirely different, shifting the carbon-14 clock across the board? What if many sites were built with stone far older than the construction itself, making the measured dates younger by thousands of years? Archaeology does not date a structure, it dates the material found near a structure. A burned piece of charcoal cannot tell the age of a wall, it only tells the age of the last fire burned beside it. Time in archaeology is not a truth, it is a mist. Tilt the lights slightly and its shape changes completely. When the dates are wrong, the history built on them collapses with it. We believe civilization began in Mesopotamia because acceptable samples date there. We believe humans arrived in the Americas 12,000 years ago because those are the dates that fit the framework. But if the clock is wrong, the whole story is wrong. And perhaps that is why so many traces too old for our timeline are pushed out of the narrative, not because they are impossible, but because there is no place for them in the agreed chronology. When everything can be misdated, the only archive left that may speak honestly is not in stone, but inside us. DNA, the oldest memory storage of humankind, that will be the next chapter, where genes tell the story history forgot. When every timeline has been questioned, when every monument has become an unknown, only one thing remains that cannot be faked: blood. DNA does not lie. It is the single scroll of memory that survives every climate shift, every meltwater flood, every fracture in history. And when science finally learned how to read that language, what DNA revealed did not entirely match the story humanity grew comfortable believing. According to the classical model, all of us originated in Africa around 70,000 years ago, then spread outward like branches of a tree. But when geneticists opened the genome of modern humans, they did not see a tree. They saw a woven network crossed by threads coming from places the old theory could never explain. In the DNA of Aboriginal Australians and the people of Papua New Guinea, there is a cluster of genes that belong neither to Neanderthals nor to Denisovans, but to an ancient, unidentified population. They call it a ghost population, a people of shadows. Those traces appear again in South Asia and Southeast Asia, hinting at something bold, that there once existed an ancient human group in a land now drowned beneath the Indian Ocean, perhaps the very Sunderland that Indian tradition calls the birthplace of the first divine beings. In Europe, things grow even stranger. Genetic analyses show that the ancestors of Europeans did not come solely from Africa. They also carry the genes of the ancient North Eurasians, a people living in Siberia 24,000 years ago, at a time when textbooks insist no humans lived there yet. Their genetic fingerprints appear in both Europe and the Americas, suggesting transcontinental movement far earlier than history is currently built to hold. In the Americas, the genomes of indigenous South Americans contain segments identical to those of ancient Australians and Melanesians, even though those regions sit half a world apart. The only possible explanation is that either an island-hopping corridor once crossed the Pacific, or there existed a vanished land that once connected two worlds, a Sunderland, or perhaps the Lemuria, whispered about in Indian Ocean mythology. These anomalies are not small errors. They are fractures running across the entire story of human origins. They show that human history did not unfold along a clean, straight line, but in overlapping circles, groups appearing, disappearing, leaving behind genetic traces like the ashes of an older world. DNA is like a burned library, yet some pages remain charred but readable. Within them are orphan genes that belong to no known human species, and signals of interbreeding with an unidentified group more than 300,000 years ago. What does that mean? It means we are not the product of a single beginning, but of many beginnings, many risings, many extinctions. When DNA speaks, it does not tell one story, but many stories. It does not describe one origin, but many origins. And if our genes reveal that the human past is far more complex than any map we have ever drawn, then our next step becomes clear. We must redraw that map. If what DNA reveals is true, that humans once mingled with groups who still have no names, that migration routes did not move in one clean direction, that ancient cultures once crossed paths across landscapes now lost beneath the sea, then the map of human history is no longer a straight line. It becomes a woven web of memory, threaded with lights that have long gone dark. Civilization, according to the textbooks, begins in Mesopotamia, but if places like Göbekli Tepe or Gunung Padang truly date beyond 10,000 or 20,000 years, then the beginning we learn is only the latest reboot, a new cycle after a catastrophe. A rebirth after the old world drowned. 15,000 years ago, the Earth had a different face. Sundayland connected Vietnam, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Doggerland stretched between Britain and the Netherlands. Beringia formed a vast land bridge linking Russia and Alaska. Places that are now ocean were once forests, plains, valleys, where humans may have lived, built, and created systems of knowledge we assume only emerged a few thousand years ago. When the ice melted, those regions disappeared, not only from geography, but from memory. What remained was scattered language, fragmented symbols, and genetic traces cut apart like torn pages. Archaeology says our ancestors were primitive, but the growing evidence suggests something else. Perhaps they were not primitive, only survivors. They watched the sea swallow the land. They understood weather through intuition. They read the sky the way we read a map. Their intelligence did not live in machines, but in ritual, astronomy, cycles, and symbols we still see repeating from Egypt to the Andes, from Polynesia to Southeast Asia. If we accept that, we must redraw the map, not a single center of civilization, but many centers, many points of light coexisting in the pre-meltdown age. Spirals, eyes, serpents, birds, triangles, not coincidences, but the remnants of a symbolic language that may once have unified humanity before it fractured. And perhaps what makes academia hesitate is not the lack of evidence, but the consequence of accepting it. Because such a truth would change everything. It would force us to admit that we did not rise from savagery. We are returning to something we once forgot, that every later civilization is a faint echo of an original that sank beneath the waves, ancient stones, star-aligned temples, stray genetic sequences, all fragments of a larger map. A map not drawn with borders, but with memory. And when we follow that map, one truth rises clearly. Our ancestors did not merely live under the sky, they read it. Every ancient civilization turned to the stars not out of superstition, but because the heavens held the memory of the world before. And it is here that the story leads us to the next chapter. Ancient astronomy, the language of the sky that our ancestors used to keep their memories alive. It is no coincidence that across the entire planet, humanity's most sacred structures all turn toward the same direction, the sky. From Stonehenge in England, the pyramids of Giza, the stone circle of Nabta Playa, to Chaco Canyon, Machu Picchu, and Angkor, every one of them aligns with the movements of the sun, the moon, or the constellations ancient peoples saw as the gateways of the universe. And the astonishing part is that many of these structures were built in ages when history insists humans were still hunters and gatherers. This forces a question we cannot avoid. How did people who supposedly had no metal, no wheels, manage to measure angles, track celestial cycles, and build with a precision that still challenges modern engineering? Stonehenge is the clearest example. Massive stones weighing tens of tons placed in a perfect circle, its main axis opening exactly toward the sunrise of the summer solstice. But deeper still, the layout encodes the 18.6-year lunar cycle, a cycle only advanced astronomical traditions ever recognize. In the Sahara, the stone circle of Nabta Playa, more than 7,000 years old, aligns with Orion, the constellation later associated with the god Osiris in Egypt. This means knowledge of Orion existed thousands of years before Egyptian civilization. At Giza, the three great pyramids mirror the three stars of Orion's belt, so precisely that many astronomers admit the alignment is too exact to be coincidence. The entire complex is also oriented to the four cardinal directions, with an error of less than 1/15 of a degree, a feat nearly impossible without deep knowledge of astronomy and Earth's geometry. In the Americas, the Temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza creates a serpent of light descending its staircase on the equinoxes, a choreography of architecture and sky. The Inca aligned the Temple of the Sun to the winter solstice. Angkor was designed around the cycle of Venus, with corridors corresponding to the planet's positions across the sky. When structures from cultures that never met, separated by oceans, mountains, and tens of thousands of miles, all speak to the stars in the same way, we must ask the question, how did the same intelligence appear in places half a world apart? Perhaps they did not turn to the stars out of superstition, but because the stars were the only things untouched by catastrophe. When the earth shook, when fire erupted, when oceans rose, only the sky remained unchanged. The stars became the clock of survival, the calendar of harvests, and the memory of ages when the world itself shifted. They did not simply observe, they remembered, engraving their memories in stone, in axes, in architecture. And perhaps deeper still, the ancients saw the sky as the source of order, a mirror of the old world they once knew before disaster reshaped it. By aligning their monuments with the heavens, they were recreating the blueprint of a primordial cosmos, one their ancestors had witnessed long before. This explains why celestial symbols spread across the globe like a shared star language, a buried memory still echoing in stone, in ritual, in design. And when the astronomical knowledge faded, the symbols remained: birds, serpents, fish, circles of light. They are not merely art, they are memory in symbolic form, the quiet testimony of those who once saw the sky fall. When language did not yet exist, and when memory could not be written into words, symbols were the only language humans had to send a message into the future. And if we read ancient symbols as picture books, we notice something strange. Across the earth, in cultures that never met, the same images appear again and again: divine birds, serpents of fire, giant fish, glowing circular objects. Why do the same images appear thousands of years apart and thousands of miles away? Perhaps because they were not inventions of imagination, but memories of the same event, retold through the language of symbol. The Egyptians had the Bennu bird, the creature of light reborn after destruction. The Sumerians carved Anzu, the lion bird tied to thunder and storms. The Chinese spoke of the vermilion bird blazing in the fire of summer. The Maya and Aztec honored Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent descending from the sky, carrying knowledge. Indigenous nations of North America spoke of the thunderbird, the stormbringer whose wings create lightning. All of them describe something moving across the sky, blazing, carrying the power of fire and lightning. In our language today, we might call it a comet, a meteor, an eclipse, or a massive atmospheric event. But the ancients had no words for such things. They had only images, and images became memory. A serpent of fire flying, a light tearing the sky, a great fish swallowing the sun. They sound like myth, yet they read like eyewitness accounts of a cosmic phenomenon. In the Mahabharata, The weapon of Indra shines so fiercely it burns the land, creates whirlwinds and thunder, almost indistinguishable from an enormous explosion in the sky. The Hopi speak of the snake people from Sirius who brought knowledge. The Akkadians describe the Anunnaki descending in brilliant light. In Polynesia, the giant fish swallowing the sun is simply the language of those who witnessed a total eclipse. Even the carvings in temples of Egypt, Sumer, and ancient Mexico, circular, shining forms, spiraling rays, are explained through modern eyes as mere decoration, yet their consistency tells another story. Perhaps these were not religious fantasies, but visual records of an event too early for writing to capture. A symbol does not preserve detail, it preserves feeling, fear, wonder, reverence, and the urgent need to record what happened. And this may be why cultures separated by oceans share symbols that look eerily alike, because they were describing the same memory with the only universal language they possessed. Seen this way, symbols become the oldest language of humankind. A global memory system that existed long before spoken language branched apart, a language we have forgotten how to read, and these symbols lead us to the next part of the story. Stone, the only material strong enough to hold memory for thousands of years, where carvings no one can read still whisper their stories in silence. There was once a language humanity understood, and then lost. A language without letters, without sound, a language that lived only in stone, from the cold cliff faces of Scandinavia across the dry Sahara to the red highlands of Peru. Strange carvings appear everywhere. Spirals, circles, geometric shapes, hands, animals, dots arranged in rhythm, even astronomical patterns carved with impossible precision. All of them cut deep into the rock, as if someone wanted to send a message to the future, but the future arrived and we can no longer read it. Tens of thousands of years ago, before writing was born, our ancestors tried to remember in the only way they believed would last forever. They carved it into stone. And what they carved was not daily life, but the things that mattered most: the sky, the cycles, the sacred animals, the moments when it felt as if the world itself had changed. In Val Camonica in Italy, more than 140,000 carvings stretch across 8,000 years, from solar symbols to human figures holding round objects that glow like light. On the rocks of the Sahara, where only burning sand remains, there are scenes of fish, crocodiles, boats, memories of a vast lake that vanished long ago. In Alta, Norway, ancient people etched reindeer hunts, ceremonial boats, and mysterious bright discs no one can explain. Identical to carvings made by indigenous peoples of the Americas on the opposite side of the world, all of them seem to whisper the same message. We saw this. But what was this? Astronomy, disaster, or the memory of something falling from the sky? In Scotland, standing stones with concentric rings match the orbital paths of comets when mapped with modern astronomy software. In Bolivia, the stones of Pumapunku hold grooves, drill holes, and right angles sharp as machine cuts, far beyond what history believes prehistoric people could accomplish. Set aside our preconceptions, and these carvings stop looking like art. They begin to look like a kind of ancient text, a language without letters, written with symbols and layout. Some scholars call it proto-writing, but the evidence suggests something deeper, a memory system encoded in imagery. Our ancestors believed stone could remember. The Egyptians said stone held the soul. The Inca called it the breath of the earth. When they carved into stone, perhaps they believed they were recording something that must never be forgotten for those who would live after everything else had vanished. Yet the strange thing is this: the more modern we become, the less we can read that language. We see the shapes, but we cannot hear the story. It is like standing inside a giant library while having forgotten the alphabet entirely. And sometimes the silence is not because understanding is impossible, but because understanding is not allowed. When carvings are labeled primitive art, every potential meaning is smothered instantly to protect the linear model of human evolution. Memory is pushed into the shadows of academia, where questions too large are treated as inconveniences, but stone does not know how to stay silent. Across millennia, it continues telling its story in its own way, even when humans refuse to listen. And each time someone gets close to the possibility that these carvings might belong to a civilization long lost, a reflex appears, quick, dismissive, almost instinctive. Atlantis. One word, enough to end the entire conversation. Because sometimes the problem is not that the story is too fantastical, but that it is too frightening if it is true. Just the mention of the name Atlantis makes most people smile, a small, uneasy smile, a dash of irony, as if the story belongs only to myth and movies. But that reflex is the real mystery. Why is humanity so afraid of the idea of a forgotten civilization that we hide from it behind a smile? In Plato's original writings, Atlantis was never framed as fantasy. He described it with unsettling detail, its location beyond the Pillars of Hercules, its concentric rings, its canals, its powerful military, its elevated philosophy, and then one day the land and sea shifted violently, swallowing everything. It was not entertainment. It read like a memory passed down for generations, recorded in philosophical form. Yet over time, Atlantis became a forbidden topic in academia, not because it is absurd, but because acknowledging even the possibility of Atlantis or any advanced civilization before 10,000 years ago would collapse the entire linear model of human progress. If a civilization existed before us, then we are not the beginning, only the afterword of a chapter that closed. This is the Atlantis syndrome, a defense mechanism of modern knowledge where people unconsciously reject anything that threatens their worldview. And ironically, the more discoveries appear, the larger the shadow of Atlantis becomes. When sonar reveals structures deep off the coast of Cuba, when the city of Dwarka emerges beneath the waters of India, when Göbekli Tepe, 11,600 years old, matches the exact time frame Plato described, when Karahan Tepe may be older still, when ancient maps depict Antarctica without ice, when sea levels rise 120 meters after the Younger Dryas, the question is no longer, did Atlantis exist? But why are we so afraid if it did? Perhaps because if a civilization was once washed away, it means every civilization, including our own, can meet the same fate. Every belief in our peak knowledge, every pride in progress, every sense of safety in the modern age begins to tremble. History stops being linear and becomes cyclical. Knowledge is not born once, it repeats. Humanity is no longer the center, only a brief rhythm in a much larger loop. And so the easiest way to avoid the truth is to turn it into a joke. The Middle Ages forbade saying the earth moved around the sun. The Renaissance forbade speaking openly about anatomy. The modern world forbids this sentence. Humanity may not be the first civilization. That taboo does not come from knowledge but from fear. The fear that if we accept it, the story we tell about ourselves becomes fragile. Yet even when people stay silent, stone does not, the sea does not, ice does not. The memory of the earth does not vanish simply because we refuse to listen. And that is when the final question rises. The question every civilization fears: can a civilization be erased completely? Or does every civilization leave behind a faint trail of light, a memory, visible only to those who know how to listen? If humanity vanished tomorrow, would anyone 12,000 years from now know we ever existed? The question isn't meant to be bleak. It's meant to reveal how fragile knowledge truly is. Because if our present could be erased in a single cycle of the earth, then perhaps it has happened before, and history is not missing pieces. Human memory is simply far more delicate than we imagine. Picture an earth without people. Within a few hundred years, forests reclaim the cities. Steel rusts, concrete cracks, bridges collapse. A few thousand years later, every structure returns to dust. All the digital data we once thought immortal disappears in decades as servers decay. After 12,000 years, the only trace of us might be a thin layer of strange sediment, plastic, melted glass, and non-natural metals, just like the mysterious geological layers found around the world that we casually label as anomalies. If this could happen to us, why could it not have happened before us? Recorded civilizations span barely 6,000 years, while modern humans have existed for hundreds of thousands, a vast empty space we simply call prehistory. But if history is not linear but cyclical, then civilization may have risen, reached its peak, and disappeared under rising seas, volcanic winters, meteor impacts, or simply the slow erosion of time. Strangely, almost every ancient culture remembers a destruction before the current age. The Greeks spoke of the flood of Deucalion, the Maya of the 4 suns that died, the Hindus of the Yugas stretching across hundreds of thousands of years, the Hopi of 3 worlds destroyed before ours. These stories overlap too closely to be coincidence, and they describe, with eerie accuracy, the very events geology now acknowledges: sudden sea level rise, rapid ice melt, climatic whiplash, world-changing catastrophes capable of erasing entire civilizations. So after one great forgetting, what remains? Only what erosion cannot devour: stone, megaliths, monumental structures, the things ancient people may have built deliberately as final signals, pyramids, monoliths, standing stones, perhaps not just temples, but stone hard drives where the old world stored its last memories. We think ourselves more advanced than our ancestors, but perhaps they differed from us in one profound way. They measured time not by human lifespan, but by catastrophe. They knew everything would fall except what was carved into stone. The question, can a civilization be forgotten entirely, is not just about the past. It is a mirror held up to the present. If we vanish tomorrow, then 12,000 years from now, another humanity might stand over our ruins and argue whether we ever truly existed. They might claim our traces were natural, accidental, unsupported. Forgetting may not be a failure, it may be a cycle. And the ancient mysteries we struggle to explain today may simply be the memories of our own previous turning of the wheel. But if memory can vanish, who holds the last fragment? Perhaps not libraries or museums, but the communities who never wrote history, yet remember it more clearly than anyone alive. And that is where the story now leads us. If memory was protected, who were the ones who guarded what was left? If libraries can burn, if cities can sink beneath the sea, if writing itself can vanish, there is still one form of memory that time cannot destroy: oral tradition. Before books existed, human beings stored their knowledge in stories, in songs, in rituals, in symbols, and the ones who held this memory were not scholars but indigenous communities, people living apart from the modern world, yet bound tightly to the remembrance of their ancestors. The Hopi say humanity has lived through 4 worlds, 3 destroyed by fire, by water, by ice, and the survivors sheltered beneath the earth until the land grew calm again. The Maori remember Hawaii, their homeland swallowed by the sea. The Ainus speak of a time when Siberia and Japan were one. The Maya tell of 4 sons that died. The Dogon of Mali carry knowledge of the star Sirius, so precise it still astonishes modern science. Separated by half the planet, they all repeat the same motif: an old world, a catastrophe, a surviving remnant, a rebirth. When they could not write, they soaked memory into culture. When they had no libraries, they turned ritual into storage. When they had no maps, they used symbols to mark what must not be forgotten. They spoke in drum beats, danced the memory of rivers and mountains, sang the names of the stars so they would not lose their way. Many of the places they call sacred align with regions that were once flooded after the last ice age, as if they still remember the paths of the water from more than 10,000 years ago. For them, myth was not fantasy, it was data. Where safety lay, where danger waited, when the sky would shift, and how to survive the turning of a new cycle. Perhaps that is why they endured long after brighter civilizations collapsed. They did not accumulate knowledge, they preserved it. They did not see time as a straight line, but as a loop. They did not try to conquer nature. They lived in rhythm with its breath. And if we call them primitive, it may be because they have not forgotten what we have lost. True progress may not be about creating the new, but remembering the old. That is why the keepers of memory are not in museums. They are sitting around fires, telling of melting ice, of the day the sun changed direction, of the stars that once fell. When we listen to them, we are not only hearing the past, we are hearing ourselves. Because if they are the keepers of memory, then we, the forgetful ones, are those trying to find our way back to it. And when memory returns, it reveals not just history, but a deeper question: what do we trust? The records that have been rewritten, or the memories that never truly died? That question leads us to the final chapter, where there is no evidence, no mythology, only the memory of humankind and the truths that live beyond any textbook. There are memories that were not born to be told, but to warn. And when we listen to the legends, the Maya, the Hindu, the Norse, the Hopi, the Polynesian peoples, what chills us is not the mysticism, but the frightening repetition across civilizations that never met. Different languages, different continents, but the same memory, that the world has ended before and not just once. The Maya speak of suns that rose and went dark. The Hindu tell of 4 yuga, ages sliding slowly into a long night. The Norse remember the winter of Ragnarok, when the world shattered. The Hopi speak of the earth splitting open and water rising higher than the mountains. No civilization says this is the first time. They all say how this has happened before, and from that a question slips quietly between layers of silence. What if these stories are not myths, but encoded laws, warnings our ancestors refused to let the next generation forget? Today, science accidentally confirms what they once sensed. With the naked eye, Milankovitch cycles shape global climate. Earth's tilt shifts the intensity of the seasons. Magnetic poles can flip faster than history can record. The sun enters periods of violent radiation that reshape climate. Our ancestors had no telescopes, but they lived long enough on land stable enough to watch the breathing of the earth. And when they had no letters, no numbers, no laboratories, they chose the only way to preserve what mattered. They turned knowledge into story so it could travel farther than they could. With modern eyes, we think they were speaking of gods. But with instinct, we see they were mapping survival. In many indigenous traditions, there is a whisper the modern world often ignores. The world does not end because humans are weak. It ends because humans forget. Forget how to read the sky. Forget the rhythm of water. Forget the language of the land. Forget that we are not the center, but a single beat in the cycle of this planet. When memory fades, the ability to see beyond one lifetime fades with it. And that is the moment when every civilization becomes most fragile. History shows that the brightest civilizations fall not because they lack knowledge, but because they believe the knowledge they have is absolute. Perhaps that is what our ancestors wanted us to remember. Civilizations do not die from catastrophe. Civilizations die from forgetting catastrophe. And so a quiet question rises like a breath. Where are we standing in that cycle now? If Earth's cycles stretch across tens of thousands of years, then our civilization, barely 6,000 years old, is truly just a newcomer in a much older loop. We may believe we are moving forward, but Earth may be moving into a downward rhythm as it did at the end of the Pleistocene or during the Younger Dryas, when the climate flipped in only a few short years. The frightening part is not that the cycle returns, but that we no longer know how to read the signals the way our ancestors did. They did not align temples to stars to show off intelligence. They did not carve flood stories to frighten listeners. They did not speak of suns disappearing for entertainment. They told, they carved, they sang, they danced, because it was the only way to send warnings across time, across culture, across forgetfulness itself. To them, memory was not the past, memory was a compass. If we treat these stories as myth, we lose that compass. If we treat them as the voices of survivors, we keep ourselves alive. And at last, a question opens like a doorway into the next chapter. If ancient memories all point toward warning, if every tradition speaks of cycles, and if the ancients left us maps in stone, in stars, in stories, what were they trying to make us understand? And are we living in the very moment they once tried to describe? When the last sheets of ice begin to crack, when the sea pulls back just slightly from the shore and sunken lands rise into view, we realize we are not simply digging through history. We are tracing the memory of humanity itself. A memory the ice has been keeping for thousands of years, every stone lifting out of the mud, every faint carving catching the sun, every buried foundation rising like a ghost is a mirror, reminding us of something we rarely want to face, that we once knew more than we remember. Across this journey, we have walked through lands that once stood above the water. Doggerland, Sunderland, Beringia. We have seen ancient maps whisper about a world before the ice, temples drowned beneath the Indian Ocean, stone pillars that feel like dreams at Göbekli Tepe, symbols repeating across continents. Alone, each piece is only a mystery, but together they whisper something simple, something unsettling. We are not the first, but the important question is not who built what or which civilization came before. Even if those answers appeared right now, they would only scratch the surface. The deeper weight lies elsewhere. Why could an entire civilization, if it truly existed, vanish so completely? If they once knew the stars, understood Earth's cycles, raised monuments we still struggle to explain, then why is there no writing left, no maps, no records? Or perhaps more precisely, why are the things that remain only images, symbols, stone, and silence? Maybe it is because human memory moves like the tide. When the ice descends, memory retreats. When the ice melts, memory returns. Every civilization at its brightest moment approaches the point where everything becomes fragile, where nature, cycles, and human pride begin rewriting the order. And perhaps what we have been searching for, from Atlantis to Sunderland, was never under the water. It has always been inside us, an inner pattern that pushes us forward, but makes us forget we are part of a much larger cycle. When we stand before carved stones, we think we are deciphering the past. But sometimes the past is the one reading us. It sees the pattern repeating, the way we build, destroy, then build again, the way we forget, then desperately try to remember, the way we believe we are the height of knowledge while we are only a single beat in Earth's long symphony. And perhaps that is why every symbol, every myth, every ritual our ancestors left behind was never meant to make us know, but to make us remember. Remember that before writing, before metal, before nations, there were lessons, warnings, cycles, and we are walking the same road they once walked. So when the ice melts and we bend down to lift a small stone, what we find is not the answer to another world. We are looking at ourselves, at a very old version of us, distant yet still waiting to be named. And when the cycle of memory finally closes, it does not close with noise, it closes with silence. A silence wide enough to ask us one final question. It's deep-dachend if memory can be erased. Then what is it that still makes us who we are?